Hey everyone, Wes Spencer coming at you. Those of you that know me know I have been involved in cryptocurrency since, 2011. Fascinating stuff, has always been really interesting to me. In this video, we're going to dive into a really unique, interesting cryptocurrency that chances are you've probably never heard of before. It's super emergent and it uses a really novel way to identify users. So stay tuned. We can't wait to dive in more in just a little bit. All right, so the cryptocurrency we're going to talk about today is called UBIC. It is standardized around this idea of universal basic income. There's a lot of cryptocurrencies that are out there. A lot of them are based on proof of work, proof of stake, any of those good things. This is the first cryptocurrency that I know of that's doing something really novel. It's using something they call proof of passport. Well, what is that? What is that all about? Let's dive in and let's learn a little bit more about it. So what is UBIC? Well, it's not an ICO, thank goodness. It's definitely not some token, an ERC20 that's running on top of Ethereum. It's certainly not some clone of something else. It's unique and it's original, which is a really good thing. And here's the idea behind it. A lot has been said around universal basic income, especially in the world of politics, which we are not going to get into today. I have no interest in diving into that. Let's just stick to the idea of universal basic income as a distribution method around a cryptocurrency. It's a fascinating concept. So that's pretty cool. Well, how does it work? Well, turns out there's a catch. When I said it's the very first proof of passport cryptocurrency, I wasn't joking. It actually uses this, your passport. See, if you didn't know, there's actually data that's on the NFC chip in the passport that UBIC is using in a really novel way to actually authenticate and identify users. Okay, so why a passport NFC? Well, there's some good reasons why. First of all, the idea behind universal basic income is giving a certain amount of cryptocurrency to every single user on the network. In fact, I can't have a single user running around multiple identities siphoning off extra cryptocurrency that would go to everybody. That's unfair to the system. In fact, UBIC is a lot different. It's like the antithesis of a proof of work or a proof of stake coin, which is based upon how much you've earned, how much mining power you're putting into, or how much you're holding. This is the exact opposite idea of everybody gets the same amount of cryptocurrency. And the second reason is this. There's been a lot of discussion around cryptocurrencies and how I can do this around a universal basic income. This is not a novel concept, but usually the implementations end up being some kind of Turing test or a knowledge check or something that's really cumbersome and difficult for users to adopt. The idea behind a passport is scan and go. So UBIC just decided, rather than go do something on our own, why don't we just rely on the native security features that are embedded inside the NFC chip on a passport? Okay, that makes sense because see, federal governments have spent lots and lots of time and resources in creating a secure authentication mechanism that can be easily embedded into any chip on any passport anywhere. If we can just take advantage of that system and use it to identify your users, it makes our world a lot simpler. At least it should in theory, right? We'll dive in more to that in just a little bit. Oh, and by the way, if you're a nerd like me, you can actually learn more about all of this. You can go check out Doc 9303 from the ICAO and see a whole lot more about how this is implemented in a public fashion and how the entire thing works. All right, so are passports a good choice for identification? Well, it all comes down to Doc 9303. So let me explain. No, there's too much. Let me sum up. The first field in that NFC chip is data group 1. That's going to have things like your first and last name, your date of birth, the date of expiration, all embedded into that section of the chip. Data group 2 is, and this is super interesting, your facial recognition data. Yes, embedded in the NFC chip in every passport, e-passport, that's standardized around Doc 9303 is your facial image. That is pretty interesting. Now, here's what's interesting about data group 3. That is accessible supposedly only by a government system. The average common folk should not have access to any of the data inside data group 3. Now, lastly, and most importantly to this conversation, there's another field called the data security object. Think of that as like the hash or a signature of all of that data above, all put together. Oh, and by the way, that's created by, in most cases, a government entity. All right, so now that you know what's in the NFC chip, what data is actually read out when you're authenticating yourself for the first time into UBIC? Well, remember that data security object? That's it, the hash. It's relying on that hash to do some checks. So does UBIC read out more than just the data security object? Well, theoretically it could. Fortunately, this is an open source project, so I can go download the source code, which I did, and take a look and confirm that it really is only reading the data security object. All right, so probably the next thing you're thinking about is when it comes to this, do I need to have it in some kind of protective slip cover like a lot of people do with their credit cards, like the foil that goes over it so people can't read it? Well, again, yes and no. Here's the good news though. Passports have something embedded in them called basic authentication control. And what that means is unless when you pull that data in, you happen to know the date of birth, the first and last name, and the date of expiry of the passport itself, you can't actually read the data. In other words, you need to be in physical possession. You can't just scan that as you're walking around in a crowd and siphon a bunch of data. You actually have to have physical access. So if you ever wondered why in customs they're opening the passport and they're looking your information up, they're typing something in, they're authenticating that to make sure that they can actually read out the data from the NFC card itself. Okay, so how does UBIC verify your identity? I thought you just told me, Wes, that all of this is built off of federal government operations. Well, it is. I don't know if you knew this, but there is the ability that anybody can go and download the certificates that are used to verify these identities. This is a really interesting concept in that some of the data will always be hidden unless you're a government entity, but some data can actually be read out and checked, namely that document security object. In other words, I can go and tell just as a common folk person, is this passport actually authentic or is it not? So how is UBIC created? Well, we know it's not mined, and we know it doesn't come through like a proof of stake process. It actually uses something called delegates. Now, currently, and I think this is because UBIC is so new, there is a hard list of delegates, but they promise they're going to open up and allow for new delegates to come into the system. The delegates are the ones that kind of run this process and are required to create the cryptocurrency and distribute it out to all the users. So what makes up a delegate? Well, according to them, it's things like people, companies, NGOs, or basically any identity that wants to spin up and run some kind of node for UBIC. In other words, basically anybody or anything. Now, right now, that delegate list is designated, but eventually it's going to have a process by which new members can be voted in and misbehaviors can be unvoted. So this is pretty cool stuff, right? Well, yeah, I love innovative concepts, and you add cryptocurrency on top, it's a match made in heaven to me. So are there risks to all of this? Yeah, there are risks to all of this, and let's dive into a few of those things that I can think of. So first of all, your identity is tied to your passport. What happens if your passport expires? Well, you're in trouble from an identification perspective. Also, what happens if your passport is lost or stolen? You're going to need a new one. Well, now you have a new government issued identification that you can add in and authenticate yourself. Now you potentially have two income sources from UBIC, which is not intended. Now, even greater, because the federal government is who creates this entire process following Doc 9303, they're the ones that actually understand the hash and all of the other data embedded in the NFC card. So could a federal government that's running through these processes actually pull that data out and unmask their users? Yep. Supposedly that's difficult, if not impossible, currently for just a regular person like me or you, but for federal governments, this is trivial. Remember, they created this process, they created these standardizations, and they're the ones that hold all the data. So if you're data privacy conscious, this is certainly something you want to really think about very strongly. Now, lastly, remember, a federal government has full power and control here. Because they are the ones that actually issue out these identifications, they could very trivially produce thousands, if not millions of identifications, flood the UBIC network with actual legitimate identifications, and drive all of this to a grinding halt. Now, would governments do that right now? Of course not. Who would spend time on that? But if this thing grew, could that become a concern? Yeah, maybe, and definitely something we should think about if you're going to get involved in UBIC. So I just find all of this really interesting. I love what UBIC is doing. I see cryptocurrencies come out on a near daily basis. I love following it. I love seeing what's coming out. This one is really particularly interesting. Also, a lot of them claim to have something completely novel. I find a lot are just rehashes of something else that's been out there. Even though UBIC has some rehashes of trying to take a universal basic income and distribute that through a cryptocurrency, I find this one to be super fascinating because they're the first ones I've seen tie it to an actual passport, thereby using that as their identity mechanism. Now, would I use UBIC? I don't know. I'm a pretty data privacy kind of person. I'm not sure in the current implementation I would be involved in getting into that, but it is something I think I'll be following and be checking into because I think this is a pretty interesting concept. So is UBIC going to go anywhere? I don't know. But rather than focus on that, let's celebrate the innovation. I think this is such a novel concept and really, really awesome. So I'm going to be tracking this and we'll see what comes out next. So what do you think about UBIC? I'd love to know. Leave your comments down below. If you like this video, smash, mash, crush that subscribe button. I need all the subscribers I can get. I would love to produce some more videos around cryptocurrency, especially some innovative and newer ones coming out like UBIC. So if you have any ideas of new ones coming out, also leave those down in the comments below. I'd love to know what those are and I'd love to tackle those. Thanks.